Thank you. Good evening. Today is August the 27th of 2025. This day is observed as the feast day of St. Margaret the Barefooted. I created a Facebook group entitled Friends Who Like St. Margaret the Barefooted a few years ago on August 27th. And I recently had some problems with Facebook, and my account was suspended. But I created a new account, and through the help of a very fine young lady who is a member of the St. Margaret's group, I was able to get back on and take charge of this group again. I give God all the praise and glory. I thank Lauren for her help. I want to talk today again about the significance of this occasion. This group is set up to honor a beautiful barefoot Christian lady who lived in medieval Italy. There's a book about her called The Barefoot Girl. And some of you who've listened to these videos before know a little bit about her, but I can't take for granted that everybody does. She was Italian saint who lived from 1325 to 1395, born into a poor family in San Severino, Italy, married at 15 to a man who abused her for years due to her dedication to the church and her empathy to the poor. But she continued to pray for him, and eventually he repented. He returned to the church and died a holy death. And she became an advocate for the poor and wished to identify with poor people. She gave up wearing shoes, dressing as a beggar, simplest and cheapest dresses, and walked barefooted in all kinds of weather. She identified with the poor and the sick, and she became known as St. Margaret the Barefooted. Truly a remarkable woman. Took Jesus' charge very seriously. And I became aware of St. Margaret just a few years back. But August 27th is an important day in my life. It was on this day 49 years ago that I began, I was early years of my career. I was living in Teague, Texas, working what was at the time called the Texas Department of Public Welfare. It's now known as the Department of Health and Human Services. And I lived in Teague, and August 27th is a state holiday. I was employed by the state of Texas 49 years ago for the Department of Public Welfare. And today I'm also employed by the state of Texas for the Department of Criminal Justice as a chaplain at the Cofield Unit. A lot of things have happened in the last 49 years. And I really enjoyed my time in Teague. And also, it was in 1975 that I began my ministry in the African Methodist Episcopal Church. I did not get an appointment the first year I was in, but I did the second. And 1976, Bishop John Hurst Adams instructed me to meet him at the Northeast Texas Conference at Bradford Chapel, Amy Church in Bonham, Texas, on Friday, August 27th, 1976. I left my apartment in Teague and drove through Fairfield, where I'd been many times, Corsicana, where I currently live and where even then I'd been many times. But I went through Ennis the first time. And I went through Kaufman for the first time, stopped and bought gas. I went through Terrell and then Quinlan and Greenville and then Wolf City. Stopped and ate some good pancakes at a local cafe. And then I was on my way up Highway 78 from Wolf City to Bonham. A woman came out from one house to another. She walked across the street, barefooted. It stood out in my mind as someone who's had a foot fetish about as long as I can remember, who has always had a strong attraction to female feet. Well, this woman, I don't know if she left her house and went across to another house, or if she left another house and went across to her house, or if she didn't even lived in either one of those houses. She may have just been visiting. Was she still in Wolf City now or not? Whether barefooting was a regular practice or just an occasional thing for her, I don't know. Is she still in Wolf City now? I have no idea. I don't know her name, anything about her. But over the last 49 years, I've wondered about that. I'd never heard of St. Margaret at the time, but I later learned that August 27th was her feast day. And I believe it's more than coincidental. In fact, it was providential that I would be at the place I was in Wolf City, seeing this barefoot woman walk across the street on the feast day of St. Margaret the Barefooted. And by the way, I was able to visit Wolf City again in 2021 when I was doing my chaplain internship at Terrell State Hospital. I was able to visit a number of times Excelsior Masonic Lodge there, both for lodge meetings and for camp pancake breakfast. Nothing like good pancakes. Right next door to the lodge is a Mexican restaurant called El Arbro, where I met a new friend, Cliff Fugit, who lives in Wolf City and who is I attended the funeral of his late father, Charles Milton, back in 1985. And Cliff is truly a great guy. We had lunch once at Pomp's Fried Chicken in Terrell, and later we had dinner at El Arbor Restaurant. And since then, I met him in Huntsville last year. I think it was September 18th of 2024 when he laid a headstone on his father's grave. Truly a great guy. Wolf City is also the home of Jonathan Price, a black man who was gunned down in 2020 by a white police officer named Sean Lucas. That case didn't get as much publicity as George Floyd, but it was equally tragic. Derek Chauvin went to prison for the murder of George Floyd. Sean Lucas shot Jonathan Price at a convenience store when Jonathan was unarmed and was found not guilty of murder. They're having some civil litigation. I hope eventually justice happens. And if I get more information on that, I'll do a video at a later time. St. Margaret was an important lady. She's identified by the Catholic Church as the patron saint of brides, widows, persons involved in difficult marriages, and victims of spousal abuse. I'm not a Catholic, and some people may say, well, you're not the Pope, you don't have any authority to make saints, but that's an opinion, which I don't agree with. And I see St. Margaret as the patron saint of all barefoot women and of the men who love them. Artificial intelligence on the internet comes up with some interesting response. You can plug a lot of things in and get some interesting answers. Sometimes I agree with the answers and sometimes I don't. It does give you food for thought. I asked the question, do female barefooters revere St. Margaret the Barefooted? Here's what they said. Indeed, some female barefooters revere St. Margaret the Barefooted. Her story resonates with some female barefooters as her actions symbolize empathy and solidarity with the poor. Her choice to go barefooted reflects a desire to connect with and serve those in need. Spiritual devotion and humility. Her barefoot walks were a form of penance and sacrifice offered to God, endured with prayer and patience through a difficult life. Strength in suffering and seeking spiritual liberation. Her story highlights her resilience in the face of abuse and her faith as a source of strength, which can be inspiring to those who choose to go barefooted for personal or spiritual reasons. While not all female barefooters may explicitly revere her, her example provides a historical and spiritual context for those who choose to live a barefoot life as a way to express humility, connection with nature, or religious devotion. Also, I asked if anybody, there's a way people walk barefooted on August 27th in memory of St. Margaret. And the response was walking barefoot on August 27th can be a meaningful way to honor St. Margaret. And significance of this, humility and spiritual connection. Walking barefoot has long symbolized humility and a spiritual connection to the earth. Removing shoes is seen as an act of surrender, letting go of ego and embracing vulnerability. In St. Margaret's case, walking barefoot was a way to empathize with and show solidarity with the poor, aligning herself with their hardship. Penance and devotion. In some Christian traditions, walking barefoot, especially during pilgrimages, has been practiced as an act of penance for sins, demonstration of humility. And holy ground in the biblical tradition, removing sandals is associated with recognizing the sacredness of a place one encounters the divine, as seen in the story of Moses and the burning bush. I realize Moses was a man. Nevertheless, there are many barefoot Christian women have been inspired by his example. Honoring her today. Well, while walking barefoot on August 27th, there could be a personal devotion to honor St. Margaret. It's also important to remember the core reasons behind her actions. You can honor her by reflecting on the importance of charity, helping those in need, praying for victims of abuse, difficult marriages, or widows. As she is the patron of these groups, committed to acts of humility and spiritual poverty in your own life. Those are two very good discussions about female barefooters in general, any day of the year, and also about walking barefooted on August 27th. But how about men with foot fetishes? Well, I Google that, and I actually don't agree with what they're saying, but here's what they say. It's highly unlikely that foot fetishes revere St. Margaret the Barefooted. They must never visited our Facebook group. As her story and significance are rooted in religious piety, charity, and suffering, not eroticism. The reasons she's called the Barefooted are unrelated to the objectification of feet. Significance of Margaret's bare feet. She was an Italian widow who performed acts of charity after surviving an abusive marriage. Yeah, that's a fact. I've already been over that. Symbol of humility and poverty, she chose to walk barefoot as an act of humility to better identify with the poor and the sick. This was an act of extreme piety and penance, not for display. Okay, I can go along with that. Patronage, her official patronages are for victims of abuse, difficult marriages, brides, and widows. There is no historical or religious record connecting her to feet or foot related desires. Until my group was started. No evidence of a connection to foot fetishism. Think again. Sexualization is a modern concept. Oh, really? There's nothing new under the sun. I bet there were foot fetishes back then. I imagine on the streets of Italy, there were some men with foot fetishes who enjoyed seeing St. Margaret. I can't prove that, but they can't prove that they didn't exist. Foot fetishism is a modern psychosocial concept, while St. Margaret's story dates back to the 14th century. Okay, we didn't have psychology as a discipline back in her lifetime. I agree with that. But there's nothing new under the sun. Under the primitive conditions of that day, certain things existed. There's no historical basis to suggest her bare feet were viewed in a sexual context by our contemporaries or followers. And there's no historical basis to prove that they weren't. Absence of information, a search of religious and historical sources, as well as sites and forums related to foot fetishism, reveals no references to her being revered or associated with this. Well, give that a little time. They don't know about St. Margaret. By the way, there have been other foot fetish groups on Facebook that I've tried to introduce to St. Margaret. I've had limited success. But some people are part of our group or part of other foot fetish groups. Ours is a group that ties Christian theology with foot fetishism, focusing on an outstanding Christian woman. And she, like other barefoot Christian women, wonderfully blends sexuality with spirituality. And by the way, on YouTube, if you ever have the time, there's a very delightful lady in Germany who is known as the Foot Missionary Queen, who gives religious devotions while displaying her feet. Some people have a problem with that. People look at different things in different ways. But it is, again, taking a theological approach to something that's very meaningful. Reverence for a saint is a religious act based on their holiness and sacrifice. A foot fetish is sexual attraction. The two are unrelated and contradictory. Wrong. There's a way the two can certainly be blended. And God created a universe, not a multiverse. And this false dichotomy between the sacred and the secular fails to recognize God's sovereignty over all. I can only just scratch the surface of that today. But I hope everybody who hears this, if you're not a member of the Facebook group, Friends Who Like St. Margaret the Barefooted, that you will join. And invite others as well. And have this opportunity to explore St. Margaret the Barefooted, a great woman of God who so wonderfully blended spirituality with sexuality, as many barefoot Christian women do this very day. God bless each and every one of you. Have a wonderful St. Margaret's Day.